The opening scene is a couple being intimate, whilst taking a shower. The man, whose name is Pete, reveals to his wife, Debbie, that he's taken Viagra. Debbie is not happy at all, stepping out of the shower and accusing her husband of not finding her attractive, to the point that he has to take Viagra to be intimate with her. Pete is confused by her reaction, as he believes she would be pleased that he has taken steps to improve their intimacy with one another. However, she does not want to hear any excuses from him as it's her birthday, and she believes he purchased the pills from an unregulated pharmacy in Mexico, which he did. Later, Pete goes to the bedrooms of his two daughters, Sadie and Charlotte, to wake them up. Debbie is downstairs in the kitchen preparing breakfast when the three of them come downstairs, Pete carrying his younger daughter. Debbie steps out of the kitchen to have a cigarette in secret, and when she comes back, her family surprises her with her birthday cake. Afterward, while their daughters argue about the TV show Lost, Debbie spots Pete sneaking another cupcake and asks her husband to put it down. He is adamant that he doesn't intend to eat it. However, his wife can see through his lies. Pete changes the subject, asking what his wife wants to do as she's just turned 40. However, Debbie isn't ready to accept that she is now 40 and states that she has just turned 38. And that Pete is turning 40 in a few days. She then asks Pete what he has gotten for her, to which he replies that he has nothing, as they seemingly agree to not get each other anything for their birthdays this year. However, Debbie is shocked, as according to her, she wanted him to get a surprise gift. Later that day, Sadie is in her room screaming that she has no clothes that fit her, while her younger sister is in her room playing the keyboard. Meanwhile, Pete and Debbie are headed out. Debbie is off to work out while Pete is headed off cycling with his friends. The couple bid each other farewell. However, when Pete is sure that Debbie isn't looking, he sneaks in another cupcake. Debbie is training with her trainer, Jason, who has a habit of hitting on her at the expense of his other clients. She feels close to Jason, considers him a friend, so confides to him that she's not happy about her husband using Viagra when the two of them are being intimate. Jason is shocked, stating that if the two of them were a couple, he'd never need any medication to help with intimacy, which Debbie finds amusing. Meanwhile, Pete is confiding in a new member of the cycling group, revealing to him that he used Viagra, and his wife wasn't happy about him. His friend, Barry, states that he shouldn't have told Debbie in the first place. Pete then asks him if he ever wants his wife to just pass away, which Barry admits he does. Afterward, the family are together in the car. Pete is singing along to one of his favorite Pixies songs, and Debbie watches her husband, perplexed. She states that the song does not make you feel happy and that she controls the radio today as it's her birthday, much to Pete's annoyance. Meanwhile, their two daughters are fighting in the back of the car. The family arrives at Debbie's fashion store to make sure that her two workers, Daisy and Jody, are getting on fine. Pete and Debbie go into the store, leaving their daughters in the car, and are pleased to see that Daisy and Jody are getting along better than they usually are. Debbie has a chat with Jody and asks her to better account for sales as they have $12,000 unaccounted for. Jody is surprised to hear this but states that the likely cause of this is that Daisy is stealing. However, Debbie doesn't believe Jody because Daisy is their best salesperson and almost bought in 5 times as much as Jody did last month. Meanwhile, Daisy is speaking to a male customer, and it becomes apparent as to how and why she has been so successful in her sales. Daisy is a young, attractive woman, and male customers have been coming in and buying things from the store just to speak to her. That evening, Debbie and Pete attend a music performance that Pete has hosted as part of his work. Pete owns a record label, which hasn't been doing too well recently. In an attempt to earn more, his label also hosts live events with artists they are collaborating with and to market new albums. Tonight, the live act is a rock and roll legend, who is a senior citizen, named Graham Parker. After the event, Debbie and Pete are in the car headed back home, when Debbie admits she doesn't like Graham Parker's music. Pete believes his wife is shallow for favoring dance music instead, emphasizing the fact that Graham Parker and his band have 2 albums in the Rolling Stones' top 500 best albums of all time. When they arrive back home, Debbie asks Sadie what she's listening to, and to her delight, her daughter is listening to music which she would describe as happy. She takes her daughter's iPod from her so that she can play the music on the loudspeakers. Debbie, Sadie, and Charlotte all begin dancing, and Pete watches on unimpressed. He then stops the music and plays some rock and roll, and his daughters can't seem to understand why their father enjoys the music he does. Pete gives up, stating that sometimes he wished that just one of them was a boy. The next day, Debbie takes Charlotte to school, where she runs into an older woman whom she refers to as Grandma Molly. Moll embraces Debbie, congratulating her on reaching 40 years of age. Debbie thanks her, but the smile quickly fades from her face when Molly states that one time she was 40 also, and then she blinked and realized she was 90. Before Debbie heads back home, she smokes a cigarette in her car, depressed by what Molly said. Meanwhile, Pete is at work, speaking to his business manager on the phone. He is being advised by his business manager to sell his home, which he is in no way on board with. He states that his wife will be displeased to know the truth about their financial situation. Later in the day, Pete is sat with his 2 colleagues, Ronnie and Kat, discussing what they can do to turn their fortunes around. They review an old documentary made on Graham Parker. However, Ronnie and Kat get into a clash of ideas and then begin arguing about their past relationship with one another. Pete gets the two back on track, informing them that if Graham's new album doesn't sell well, their label may not survive. When Pete arrives back home, he and his wife have a conversation regarding their future. Debbie voices her concerns about the way they've treated life up until now, as Molly's statement about blinking at 40 and waking up 90 years of age struck a chord with her. Pete listens to his wife as she states that the two of them should fight less, exercise more, and go to therapy. However, the two of them disagree on certain things, and Pete even fails to admit the fact he is still giving his dad money behind Debbie's back. That evening, while the two of them are in bed, Debbie reveals to Pete that she believes that Daisy is stealing from the store. This worries Pete, as he states they need the store to be a success. Debbie is looking through surveillance footage to check whether Daisy really is the culprit. However, she only finds footage of Daisy being intimate with men in the shop. Pete is horrified, although Debbie laughs, commenting how at least she's having sex. Pete is confused as he is sure the two of them had sex recently, though Debbie replies that their intimacy lacks passion. Pete responds to his wife by passing wind, which disgusts Debbie to the point that she hits him with a pillow. The next day, Debbie and Pete both take steps to better take care of their well-being, even though Pete takes out some donuts from the trash and eats them beforehand. Pete has a colonoscopy, while his wife pays a visit to the gynecologist and dentist, and none of their appointments go smoothly. After the medical appointments are over, Pete visits his father. When he arrives, he meets his half-brothers, who are triplets and much younger than he is. Pete's father, Larry, states that he struggles to tell the triplets apart. Pete asks his father how his curtain business is going, and Larry responds that it's not going well, and he cannot understand why, as everyone should be buying curtains. Reluctantly, Pete informs his father that he's going to have to cut back in giving money as he is being forced to make cuts due to his business not doing as well as he hoped. This makes Larry panic, informing his son that he cannot cut back on paying him as he has 3 young children to take care of. Pete is unimpressed, asking his father why he even chose to have children if he didn't have the financial means to look after them. His father replies that he was worried that his wife would have left him had he not given her children, even if the eggs were from a donor. Larry then mentions that Pete's mother wanted him aborted, but it was he who changed her mind. His son immediately realizes that Larry is attempting to guilt-trip him into giving him more money, but before he can respond, Larry's wife walks in and interrupts their conversation as she's delighted to see Pete. Meanwhile, Debbie goes to lunch with her father, Oliver. Debbie is pleased to see her father and asks that he visit more as he recalls the last time he saw Sadie. She was very small and now she's a teenager. However, Oliver states that he is busy just like Pete's father. He also has children much younger than Debbie. He begins showing Debbie pictures that he took of himself and his other children. But before he can finish, he darts off to the restroom. Debbie is left at the table alone but continues swiping through the pictures Oliver has on his phone. She looks at the pictures of her younger siblings happy with her father and cannot help but feel sad that he doesn't choose to spend as much time with her. Sometime in the future, the family is in the yard having a meal. Debbie announces that she and Pete have spoken to one another and have got some new rules that they're spending more time together as a family. The first rule is that they are going to use less technology, which means no smartphones and no computers, and that they are taking down the Wi-Fi. Sadie is appalled at the decision to strip her of all technology and begins to argue with her parents, assuring them that she does nothing wrong with her devices, unlike other teens. However, her pleas fall on deaf ears, as Pete and Debbie are staying firm on their new rules. Debbie and Pete decide to take a quick vacation together to celebrate Debbie turning 40, leaving their children in Jody's care. On the way to the hotel, the two of them talk about how refreshing it is to finally get away from their annoying daughters, even though they dearly miss and love them. The couple thoroughly enjoy their alone time together, and once in their room they ask each other why they even fight in the first place. Eventually, their short holiday is over, and they arrive back home to see Charlotte crying in pain. Jody admits that she wasn't sure what to do, and as she knew the couple were headed back today, she decided to wait for them before taking action. The couple takes their youngest daughter to the doctor, who informs them that Charlotte should no longer consume sugar, much to Pete's devastation. Not pleased to hear this as it may endanger his junk food binge eating, Pete begins mocking the doctor, which in turn annoys Debbie. Sometime in the near future, Debbie is at her store where she is speaking to Jody. The two of them comment on how expensive the outfit Daisy is wearing, and Debbie wonders how she was able to afford it. Jody remarks that it's most likely because she was stealing, and that everything Daisy says is a lie. Debbie walks up to Daisy and asks if she can wear something from the store, to which she obliges. When Daisy begins changing, Debbie watches and remarks how she's so self-conscious about her body now, and Daisy responds by encouraging her not to be too harsh on herself. She doubts that she herself will look the same way when she's Debbie's age. Meanwhile, Pete is at work, and on the phone with an estate agent. The agent informs him that the true valuation of their home is lower than initially expected, which Pete is devastated to hear, stating that his wife has unrealistic expectations. That evening, after confiscating Sadie's electronics, Debbie and Pete are going through their daughter's social media when they are horrified to see that a boy from her class placed her on a not hot list. This infuriates Debbie, who admits she wants to slay the boy, while Pete is worried about what it would do to Sadie's self-esteem. However, they see that their daughter commented back and stood up for herself, which makes them proud. Just then, Pete has to take an urgent phone call from Ronnie, who informs him that they only sold 612 album downloads, much to Pete's dismay. The next day, Pete is headed off to work and is dropping off his 2 daughters at school on his way there. Meanwhile, Debbie is in a meeting with a financial advisor who tells her everything about the financial problems the family is facing, including the fact that Pete's record label is failing. When Pete reaches the office, he is disappointed to see that Ronnie is doing nothing but drawing album covers. The 2 men get into an argument, Ronnie stating that he has responsibilities and that the reason they are failing is because Pete spent too much money on things they don't need, rather than flying in the rumor as a band and not just their lead singer, Graham Parker. Pete responds that he doesn't have the money to fly in the whole band, as that would cost $12,000, but is then convinced by Ronnie, and he instructs him to put it on his Amex. Elsewhere, Debbie has come to visit her gynecologist, who has some important news for her. The doctor confirms that even though he had previously told her that she was no longer able to conceive, she is now pregnant again. Debbie is shocked to the point of silence and disbelief. She states that she is very happy, and Pete will be too, whilst almost crying. Speaking of Pete, he takes a trip to his father's house and hands him one of his prized possessions, a drawing John Lennon made, which he had bought some years ago for several $1,000s. Pete instructs his father to sell the drawing, so he can help him financially without having to give him money. Larry is hesitant as he doesn't know how to sell a piece of art, but eventually gives in when he realizes that his son will not be able to help him in any other way. Later, Pete and Debbie are sitting together at Sadie's school, watching their daughter help set up the stage for a school play coming up. Debbie attempts to break the news of her pregnancy with her husband, but fails to do so after she asks him if he ever thinks about having more children, and he immediately answers that he does not. Afterward, Debbie is walking to the car on her own when she spots the boy who insulted Sadie by putting her on the not hot list. Debbie ends up threatening the boy, whose name is Joseph, and this almost moves him to tears. She immediately realizes what she has done and apologizes to Joseph, who then comments that his own mom also acted the same way when she was going through menopause. Offended by this comment, Debbie corrects Joseph by informing him that she is not going through menopause, shouts at him, and then storms off. That evening, Debbie catches Pete on the toilet, playing games on the tablet. She informs him that she is going out with Daisy tonight to find out whether or not she's stealing from the store. Pete is confused, as tonight is another Graham Parker concert that he's hosting, and can't watch the children. Debbie states that he should figure that out and heads off, while Pete angrily holds his finger up at her from behind the door. Debbie meets Daisy at a nightclub, who introduces her to a team of hockey players who have just won the championship that night. She asks Daisy to come with her, as they're out together to talk about business. However, Daisy is adamant that she wants to party with the hockey players. Meanwhile, Pete is at the concert speaking to Ronnie, voicing his surprise at how few people have come to the concert. Ronnie remarks that it's difficult for most of Graham's fans to make it to his concert, as most of them are old enough to remember D-Day. Afterwards, Pete sits down with Kat, who informs him that she's been offered a job at Sony, who were Pete's old employers. Pete asks Kat who hired her, which she replies was a man named John, someone Pete is familiar with as he hired him, and then John betrayed him. Back at the nightclub, Debbie really starts to feel the vibe and begins dancing with the hockey players. Later, she sits speaking to one of the hockey players, who expresses an interest in her and even asks if she would like to go back to the hotel with him. Debbie apologizes, revealing that she is a married mother of 2 and that she is currently pregnant. The hockey player understands and apologizes, though Debbie admits she enjoyed him being nice to her. When Graham's concert is over, Pete tries to speak to him to inform him about his record sales. However, when Pete informs him of this, Graham isn't surprised, as he states that his records never sell anymore and that he relies on other means to financially support himself, such as TV shows like Glee, who have recently asked him to write them a song. Later, Pete is sat in his car, alone, crying. Debbie drives Daisy back to her apartment, and the 2 of them laugh about the night they've just had. When they arrive at Daisy's apartment building, Debbie comes out and asks her if she knows why they're missing $12,000. Daisy asks her if she thinks she's the culprit, though Debbie denies this. Daisy accuses Jody of being the culprit, stating that Jody is secretly a However, Debbie admits she cannot understand how Daisy can afford a nice apartment, fancy car, and expensive clothes. Daisy reluctantly reveals that she's able to afford all the nice things she owns because she is an escort, which shocks Debbie, though she is understanding. Debbie then asks Daisy for advice on an issue she is dealing with, and Daisy immediately knows that Debbie is pregnant. She advises Debbie to tell Pete and to tell him when the 2 of them are being intimate, which Debbie agrees with. However, the next day, this doesn't go to plan, as Pete is not in the mood to be intimate with Debbie. Instead, the two of them end up arguing, which ends up escalating when Debbie reveals she knows that Pete has been lying to her about their financial situation. The two voice their frustrations about how they feel the other doesn't like them, and Debbie asks Pete to cancel his birthday party, which he refuses. Later, the family is watching TV together when Sadie gets mad at her younger sister for putting her fingers on her mouth and then wiping it on her. Pete and Debbie, who are sitting there still angry with one another, tell Sadie off for reacting to her younger sister's actions. Sadie storms off, and before Charlotte exits the room, she states that she is sick of everyone fighting. The next day, Pete feels invigorated when he buys himself several burgers before he drops his daughters off to school. Afterward, he runs into Joseph's mother, Catherine, who is furious that Debbie shouted at her son and threatened him. Pete listens to her concerns about his wife but is angered when Catherine insults Debbie. He informs Catherine that her son insulted his daughter first and that if he wasn't keeping it together, he would hit Joseph with his car. Catherine, now even angrier, takes Joseph away while informing Pete that he will pay for his rudeness. Elsewhere, Debbie confronts Jody on whether or not she was the one who stole the money from the store, and it doesn't take long for her to admit her crime. Debbie asks Jody to pay her back. However, she is too high to give Debbie a coherent response. Just then, Debbie receives a message on her phone and has to leave, while Jody curses her under her breath. Debbie and Pete are summoned to the school principal's office, who wants to speak to their parents about their recent confrontations on school grounds. Catherine starts off the conversation by accusing Debbie of threatening her son, and Pete claiming to hit her son with his car. The couple denies this, and Catherine is enraged, insulting everyone in the room including the principal. However, this is her big mistake as the principal ends up siding with Debbie and Pete on the issue. After the meeting, Pete and Debbie step out of the office smiling, though still not speaking to one another, and they both go back home in separate cars. Once they arrive home, the two of them are in the kitchen with Charlotte when Sadie walks in crying, asking her parents if they read her private messages. Pete denies this, though Debbie admits to her daughter that they did. Sadie says she has found out that the two of them subsequently made Joseph cry after reading their private conversation, and openly swears at her parents, which shocks them. She storms off to her room, and Pete and Debbie both make up for the fight they had after agreeing that the creator of Lost is responsible for their daughter's current attitude. Meanwhile, Charlotte hands Sadie her phone, stating that she stole it from her parents for her older sister. The day of Pete's birthday party finally arrives, and the first thing he does is make sure his sulking older daughter is ready. He marches into Sadie's room, and unfortunately for him, his teenage daughter is crying while watching the final episodes of Lost on her computer. Pete admits to her he cannot understand why she's so moved by Lost, and Sadie replies it's the same thing as him crying over Mad Men, Pete's favorite TV show. The guests eventually arrive, and Pete is speaking to Barry in his yard. The two of them are staring at Daisy, who is swimming with the kids in the pool. Barry cannot believe that Debbie has hired someone as attractive as Debbie and invited her to her husband's birthday party, as both of their wives carefully watch their husbands staring at Daisy. Later, Pete is conversing in his yard with Ronnie when Debbie introduces him to Jason, her trainer. Jason immediately starts bragging to him about how he has made his wife more attractive through his training methods. However, Pete has no interest in listening to Jason for long. He leaves Ronnie to speak to Jason, much to his dismay, while he takes his wife inside to speak in private. Just then, Ronnie and Jason both spot Daisy in the pool and immediately head over to her. Meanwhile, back inside, Oliver has arrived and greets his daughter and son-in-law. Later, the three of them are in the yard together at the buffet when Larry and Claire arrive with their children and greet them all. Claire gets busy with the kids, and Larry is confused when he is introduced to Oliver, as Debbie has been married to his son for 15 years, yet this is the first time he's meeting her father. Larry questions Oliver about where he has been all this time, to which Oliver replies that he's just been busy. Just then, Sadie and Charlotte come with Daisy and are confused by the man standing next to their mother, as Charlotte has never met Oliver, and Sadie was too young to remember the last time they met. Debbie explains that the man is her father and by extension their grandfather, which leads Larry to make a face in disgust. Elsewhere, Ronnie and Jason are competing for Daisy's attention. The two of them bump into her in the pool and strike up a conversation, though she mistakes them for a gay couple and swims away, with them still in pursuit. Back on dry land, Larry and Oliver are getting to know one another better. However, Larry's interest in Oliver is piqued when he realizes that he is a fairly wealthy spinal surgeon and tries to pawn off the John Lennon drawing he was given by Pete. Jason, Daisy, and Ronnie are out of the pool, sitting at a table, trying to get to know one another better. Daisy asks Ronnie his zodiac sign, and unfortunately is told his Libra is completely incompatible with Daisy's Taurus. Jason, on the other hand, is a Cancer, and Daisy is visibly interested in him when learning this, as it is completely compatible with her, who is a Taurus. She even states that the two signs are soulmates. While this happening, Debbie and Pete are sitting at a table with their fathers and Brian and his wife. Debbie raises a toast to forgiveness, which rubs Larry the wrong way, and he asks, who she wants to forgive, believing she is forgiving him for asking for money. Pete asks his father to calm down. However, Larry goes and even tries to get Oliver to pay him for abandoning the family for 7 years. Debbie can't believe Larry's behavior and looks to Pete to back her, though Pete states that they're not looking for handouts as they will pay Oliver back. Oliver states that he'll be more than happy to help his daughter and son-in-law, though Debbie dismisses this, stating that it's never okay to borrow money from family. Larry is confused by this statement, replying that the family should help the family, which Pete agrees with. However, Pete is silenced when he realizes he has hurt Debbie's feelings. Oliver excuses himself, realizing that everyone is on edge, though before he can leave, Pete insults him for never being present to see his grandchildren. Debbie begins to cry, stating that she is constantly left to bust the balls of people who have no balls. Later, after Pete has blown out the candles on his cake, Sadie catches her mother smoking in secret. Debbie is embarrassed that she was seen by her daughter and walks into the kitchen while denying that she smokes. Charlotte, who was already in the kitchen, is equally shocked at the fact her mother smokes. Just then, Barry's wife Barb, who occasionally trains with Jason and Debbie, informs Debbie that she shouldn't smoke while pregnant. Barb immediately realizes that she has made a blunder, as not Pete, who was eating cupcakes in the kitchen, and Debbie's daughters know that she is pregnant. However, no one is more shocked at the news than Pete, who is told by Debbie that he wasn't informed because he didn't even want a baby. Pete angrily replies that she has no idea what he wants, while Charlotte asks if they're having an Asian baby, much to Sadie's annoyance. Sadie and Charlotte begin arguing, while Pete begins interrogating his wife on the status of her pregnancy. Debbie sees the cupcake in her husband's hand and screams at him, silencing everyone in the kitchen. Debbie storms out of the kitchen, and now everyone seems to be aware of the news of her pregnancy. She is first congratulated by Larry and Claire, and then her father, who asks her to take better care of herself as pregnancies after 40 can be complicated. Debbie dismisses his advice, stating that she doesn't even know him. Oliver doesn't want to argue. He apologizes to his daughter and tries to take his leave, admitting that it may be best if the two of them weren't in each other's lives. However, before he can leave, Debbie stops him and then reminds him that it was he who walked out of her life when she was just 8 years old. For the first time, Oliver seems to lose his cool. He admits that he ruined his first life and has been trying to live his second one. Oliver also admits that his new life is nowhere near the perfect life he has pretended to be, as his teenage son is an addict while his wife lives in her own world. Debbie asks why he has never told her this, and he admits that it's because he believes she never wanted to hear about his problems. Just then, Larry, Claire, and the rest of the family ask them if it would be a good time to leave, as they all watch Pete leave the home riding his bike. While Pete is dodging through traffic on his bike, trying his hardest to enjoy his birthday after all that has happened, Sadie has invited Joseph over, who is given a slice of cake by Debbie. Larry and Debbie then head out in her car to find Pete, who accidentally collides with an open door of a car. The driver of the car is a large man, who is furious with Pete crashing into his vehicle, and demands he pay for it. Pete is on the ground, holding his rib cage in severe pain. Eventually, he gets up and is furious with the man for not checking his mirrors before opening the door, informing him he has no intention of paying to get his car fixed. The man punches Pete in the face, and Pete attempts to fight back but is unable to do so given how large his opponent is. Larry and Debbie watch from her car, and Larry states that his son has never been much of a fighter. Debbie exits her car and runs to her husband, while Larry stays inside. Pete is taken to the hospital by his wife and father, and it is confirmed that he has a broken rib. But other than that, he is completely fine. While in the waiting room, both Larry and Debbie apologize to one another and embrace, finally speaking about the issues they had with one another. Meanwhile, Oliver is spending more time with his grandchildren, spending the evening binge-watching Lost. Debbie is told by a nurse that she can now see Pete, and when the two of them see each other, they both immediately apologize. Pete admits that he let her down, but that he never wants to lose her, and he will get her pregnant every 10 years if it means that she'll never leave him. Debbie begins to cry, admitting to her husband that he is her favorite person in the world. She asks her husband if he feels trapped, and Pete replies that sometimes he feels that he has trapped her, and she can't go anywhere. Debbie asks Pete what they're going to do with the third baby, and the two of them agree to sell the house as they leave the hospital together. Sometime in the future, the couple are at a Ryan Adams concert, when Debbie asks Pete why he doesn't sign him. Pete laughs, admitting that Ryan would never sign with him, though Debbie says she doesn't understand as her husband is the best and the two of them kiss.